Hello and welcome to Learning Music with Pat. I'm going to spend the time today discussing timing and reading notes, just reading them in terms of their timing, how long they are, how short they are, how long they last, how do you count the time, and this kind of thing. And I've decided to do that because a lot of people have trouble with mathematics and they have trouble reading time. They don't understand what it means. And you can explain it to them and they understand it, they seem to understand it, and then suddenly when they go to play, it doesn't transfer from what they've learned to the pages that they're reading. Now I can be sympathetic with this because I have kind of the same problem. I'm just a lousy mathematician. I don't figure out math very well at all. But there are simple things, if you can just visualize it, and if you could think of subdivision and subdivision, then you can get a hold of it, I think, a lot easier. When I was teaching children at a school where I was teaching, it was actually a fine arts center. I taught them with what I called my donut method. So I decided to teach from that method. Even young adults have difficulty with it. If you have a problem in spatial relationships and you have a problem in counting time and understanding what it means, and time doesn't mean all that much to you, then you're probably going to be helped by this, because I found it helped a lot of people. And as I worked with it, it became so clear. And just as an aside, I'm not good at math, and I was afraid when I was in high school to take chemistry because I needed to take chemistry to get into college. And so I kind of dreaded it because I couldn't do math very well. But I had a teacher, a chemistry teacher, that explains things so carefully and so well and so simply that I had to get it. I mean, it was just so clear. And I think what I'm trying to do here for people who have difficulties, I'm trying to make things so clear that it just comes naturally and then they can remember it. So we're going to do it the way that I would do it with kids. And I made out a new chart, and I'm going to be using that new chart. And hopefully we'll make some progress in terms of understanding time. Now remember, for a general rule, there's always an exception. But I don't want to deal with the exceptions here. I want to just talk about the general rules and how this is done. So supposing, and we'll look at the chart, supposing you have something round, it could be a pie, it could be a pizza. In this case, it's a donut. And the way that I actually got that donut with a picture of it is what I did was I went to a store and I bought a dozen sugary donuts. They were small ones. And then I went to the place where I was employed at the time, a counseling center where I was employed at the time, and I took one of the donuts and I put it on the photocopier, and I closed the top of the photocopier, not so it would be really too close to the top of the donut because I didn't want a lot of crumbling. I knew it would crumble some. That's why you get some of these little white spots where it crumbled. And I took a photocopy. And then I could make the photocopy bigger, smaller. I could use scissors, I could use tape, I could change it however I wanted to. But the idea is I wanted something round. And the donuts seemed to be like a good choice. Everybody likes them. And so that's what I went with. So you have here a full-size donut. And it's a circle. Well, this is a circle too. This is a whole note. This is a whole donut. This is one whole note. It's usually, except for certain exceptions, it's usually the only note in the measure. It's just a circle, it's clear, it's not colored in, and it has the time of whatever the time of the song is. If the song is 3/4 time, which is waltz tempo, it would get 3 beats. If the song is 4/4 time, then it will get 4 beats. We're going to assume, for the most part, that this has 4 beats, and it's a whole, just like that donut is whole. Well, what if you cut it in half? You cut it in half and you have 2 halves. 2 halves make a whole. You know that for sure, don't you? You cut a pie in half, you get 2 halves, but the 2 halves together would make a whole. So I separated it and made 2 halves. These are half notes. They're circles, they're still clear circles, but they have a stem on them. And this stem just indicates that they're half notes, not whole notes. Two halves make a whole. 1, 2, 1, 2. The two halves make a whole. If you added these together, it would be the equivalent of this, because two halves make a whole. Now you can also subdivide it further. I just want you to think in terms of subdivision. Draw another line and cut it into quarters. You have 4 now. 1, 2, 3, 4. Quarter notes are actually circles that are colored in, and they have a stem on them. The stem can go up or the stem can go down. It doesn't matter. That's what it is. It's a stem. And you have 4 of them. 2 of those quarters would equal a half, just like 2 of these quarters would equal a half. That would be a half. That would be a half. Or if you looked at it from the other direction, this would be a half and this would be a half. If you put them all together, you would get a whole. So 4 quarters equals a whole. That's going to be easy to remember, because in our money system, 4 quarters is $1. 25 cents, 25 cents, 25 cents, 25 cents. It's broken down in 4s. So whenever you see a 4 in a time signature, it stands for a quarter, and these are the quarter notes. Now you can combine them. You could actually separate them a little. You could make 2 eighths out of that quarter. It would still together be a quarter. You could make 2 eighths out of this, this, or this. It would be a quarter when you add them all together. So 2 quarters make a half. 2 quarters make a half. 2 halves make a whole. 4 quarters make a whole. If the lines weren't there, this would be a whole. So if you can remember that, you are subdividing a whole into parts when you have different times. If you can remember that, that will be most helpful. Now, supposing I want to draw a line here and here, like I've done in this, what you're going to get is eighths. Eighths is a body that is colored, and then you have the stem, and you have 1 flag. That's called a flag. That's an eighth note with 1 flag. You have 8 of them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And all I did was cut a line and make 2 out of these quarters. 2 quarters, 2 eighths will make a quarter. And that's the way it would be. Now the eighth notes, they have the stem and they have 1 flag. If you were to count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, it takes 8 eighth notes to make a whole. You know, it takes 4 quarters. If you put these 2, it would be a quarter. These 2 would be a quarter. These 2 would be a quarter. These 2 would be a quarter. Why? Because a quarter can be split in 2, and when you split them in 2, you get an eighth note. So an eighth note is half of a quarter. So this actually would be the equivalent of 2 eighth notes. If we were to break it down that way, a quarter is 2 eighths. Here's a quarter composed of 2 eighths. Here's a quarter composed of 2 eighths. Here's a quarter composed of 2 eighths. I have the eighths written down here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If you put 8 together, if you were to write a fraction, 8 over 8 equals 1. 2 over 2 would equal 1. 4 over 4 would equal 1. You just subdivide it. That's all you're doing is subdividing. So eighth notes are a little faster. There's a little more of them. But if you put them all together, you still get that whole, which is the same as this. It's just subdivided down. So you have whole into halves, into quarters, into eighths. Now you can do it again. I could take those eighths, and I did it down here, and cut them in half, and what do I get? I get sixteenths. Now sixteenths are a note that has 2 flags on them. You have 2 flags on the 16th, 1 flag on the 8th, just a stem on the quarter, a stem on the half, and just an open hole for the whole. So you get 16 of them, but it's still making up the whole. The pieces are smaller. The sections are smaller because there's more of them, but totally they still make that whole. So we go from the whole to the half, to the quarters, to the eighths, to the 16ths. Now, if I wanted to, and I'm not going to do it in this class because you wouldn't get into it until you get into some seriously difficult music, you could split the 16ths and you would get 32nd notes. Those would be 3 stems. Or you could take the 32nd notes and split them again and make 64th notes. 64th notes have 4 stems on them. And most music that you're going to see is not going to be these 2, so I'm kind of knocking them out of the picture. I do want you to see them so you'd recognize them when you do see them, because they do exist. So whole, half, quarter, eighth, and 16th. We will be able to go up to the 16th. That's not that hard. They may look hard, but they're really not hard. So this is the way that you subdivide and get the different kinds of notes. Now you can combine notes together. The one thing I didn't do thirds. I just didn't happen to think of it. But if I wanted to take this whole, I'll just kind of explain it. And I wanted to draw a line here and a line here. If I want to divide it into thirds, I draw 3 lines approximately the same distance apart. So you get 3 sections, and you can have thirds that way. A third would be like a dotted half, and I'll have to explain how that happens. A dot means something. In music, when you have a dot, you hold a note longer than if you don't have the dot. So if I were to take, for example, this half note and put a dot beside it, that would be 3 beats instead of 2. 2 halves make the whole. Usually 2 halves are 2 beats apiece. If the whole is 4 beats, and we're just assuming for the sake of discussion that the whole is 4 beats. It usually is, by the way, although I can think of exceptions which I'm not going to bring up, but the whole is 4 beats. Cut that in half, you get 2 halves. 2 halves make a whole. So if this is 4 beats, then these 2 halves is going to be 2 beats apiece. 1, 2, 1, 2. 2 beats, 2 beats. And if I wanted 3 beats, I'd kind of knock this out of the picture, see if you can imagine it for me, because I didn't draw it in. A dot there is a half of what that note is worth. If this note is worth 2 beats, a dot gives it 1 extra beat, which makes it 3. And the reason for that is that a dot makes a note half as long as what the original note was. So if the original note was a half note of 2 beats, you take half of that, which is 1 beat, and add it to that note to make it a little longer, and you get a 3-beat note. And that's what 3 beats would be. If I put a dot by a quarter note, that would be a quarter plus an eighth, so it's a little bit longer. It's like half again as much as that note is worth. That note is worth 1 beat, and since half of that will be an eighth note, you put a dot there, and then it's a dotted quarter, and it's a note and an eighth long, so it's an eighth longer, just a little bit longer than the original note is. A dot will add 1/2 of the value of the note that it follows. So if you can remember that, that would make that 3 beats. Now, I have seen dots with a whole note. A dot with a whole note would make that 6 beats. How come? Because if this is 4 beats and a dot makes it worth 1/2 more, half of that 4 beats is 2 beats. So you add that 2 beats to that note. That note becomes 6 beats long, even though there might be easier ways of writing it than that, but that's technically what it would be. So if you can just think in terms of subdivision, and when you're counting, when you're playing a woodwind, you can't count out loud. So you're counting in your head, and you can think to yourself, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And for the 8th, how you would count that, those are half a beats. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. You still get the 4, but it's subdivided into 8th notes, so you count them 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now, when you subdivide it again and get the 16th note has 2 flags on it. These 4 notes with the 2 flags, now there are 2 lines going across the note. Those 2 lines is the same as 1 beat. 4/16 is going to equal 1 beat. That's 1 beat, that's 2 beats, that's 3 beats, and that's 4 beats. As long as there are 2 lines stretching between them or on them singly, then that's a 16th note, 4 to a beat. Now, I hope it doesn't sound too complicated for you, because when you're playing a piece, what you've got to do is you've got to count the numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And with the 4, 1 it is a, 2 it is a, 3 it is a, 4 it is a. One of my music teachers when I was young taught us that little trick. How do you count a 16th? 4 to a beat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, you can't count that fast. And you're dealing with one set of 4 notes equal 1 beat. What if it's a fast what if it's a fast way to do it? A fast running notes that you have. It's easier to think 1 it is a, 2 it is a, 3 it is a, 4 it is a. If you think of it that way, it becomes easier to count. But you will know when you see a 16th, so when you see 4 of them in a row, and they have a line between them, 2 lines between them, those are 16th notes, and 4 16th notes equals 1 beat. So you're going from a whole to 2 halves equaling a whole, to 4 quarters equaling a whole, 2 quarters equal a half, 2 halves equal a whole. Subdivide the quarters into 8, so you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which is what I did here, and subdivide that again and get 16ths, you know? And that's the way that you think of them. It's subdividing whatever the time signature is. And so whole, quarter, 8, 16, 32nd and 64th, which we're not dealing with, but they do exist in some difficult music. So you have to kind of think of it that way. It's like a subdivision. And if you think of it when you're counting the music, then you can think of it and you can get it all set like that. So this is what I wanted to start out with. Now I'm going to show you some other things also with charts. I hope this is clear to you. If it isn't, email me here at the station and I'll go on the air and explain it further. I want to show you, for example, here's a song. I don't know how much time. I don't have too much time left. Maybe I'll play it next session. 3/4. What are these? These are time signatures. 4/4, 3/2. What does that mean? Well, the signature is the time signature has 2 numbers, and there's a line between them. It's written like a fraction. And what it means is that you have, this is the number on the top, this is the number of beats there is to a measure. And on the bottom, that's the type of note that gets 1 beat. Now that bottom line, it says 4. So that 4 means there are quarter notes. 3 beats to a measure, but it's 3 quarter notes. Because that 4 is there, it's talking about quarter notes. If the 8th note is underneath, as it is, this is 6/8 time. If the 8th note is as it is, it's talking about an 8th note gets 1 beat. And this is 4/4 time. And the fourth time would be a quarter note. But what we have here is something called triplets. When you have triplets, and I've marked this out on top, there'll be 3 notes to each beat. 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3. And so you have triplets is 3 notes to 1 beat. 1, 2, 3, and this really is kind of triplets, even though it's not marked like it. You have a quarter note and you have an eighth note. The quarter note would be split into 2 eighths, and this would be the 3rd eighth. So it has the same timing as a triplet does, even though it's not written that way. Now here I have 3/2. This is the same song. I've got the same song in different signatures. 3/2 means 3 beats to a measure, but 2 stands for half. So a half note gets 1 beat. It's one of the exceptions that I talk about, because a half note usually gets 2 beats and would get 2 beats if it was 4/4 time. But if 2 is on the bottom, then that's the kind of note that gets 1 beat. So in this case, the half notes get 1 beat. 1, 2, 3, 1 beat, 2 beat, 3 beats. 3 beats to the measure, all of it half notes, because the half note gets 1 beat. So I hope this makes this clearer. I'm going to go into this further with you. We're about out of time. I'll close it here, but I will be going on with this because I want to make it really clear. Music reading doesn't have to be terribly difficult as long as you kind of get it in your head as to how to do it and what it means. Then it comes naturally. Heaven knows I'm the worst mathematician in the world. I'm just terrible at math. I don't have trouble reading music, though, because I can understand the subdivisions, which is what I'm trying to help you to do as well. So we'll continue with this next time. Please join me then.